A custom PC build is a lot like assembling a model kit or piecing together a puzzle. Most components and their connections will only work with their respective slots or interfaces. Steps are very similar in most builds regardless of hardware generation or vendor. Choosing components for your build often hinges primarily on budget, but also for quality and purpose of the intended machine being assembled. For example, a PC built for gaming will likely be processor, memory, and graphics card biased, whereas a workstation PC will be focused on disk storage and performance, memory, and stability. For any build, the choice of quality components for the price range is always highly recommended. Skipping on components like a power supply can potentially cause system failures or problems with the entire machine. Some basic tools that I recommend and use for PC building include a multifunction screwdriver with interchangeable bits, an assortment of zip ties for cable cleanup and management, and a pair of snips to nip off the ends of the zip ties. Of course, you'll want to have all the boxed install hardware such as manuals, screws, and parts. Most current generation processors for both AMD and Intel will have somewhat similar installation steps involving their socket install and retention mechanism. Consult your CPU and motherboard manuals for exact steps. Here I'm releasing the retention arm of the socket clamp and lifting it open to expose the socket. Take note of the orientation tabs or slots on both the motherboard socket and the processor itself. Gently place the processor into the socket, ensuring it is making good contact. Then close the retention clamp and properly secure the retention mechanism. For this build, I will be installing a Cooler Master cooler with a backplate that utilizes the standard CPU cooler mounting holes. The direct contact heat pipes of the cooler will sit on top of the processor in the same manner that boxed OEM cooler would. The backplate provides additional support to take stress off the motherboard and mounts using supplied hardware. Once the mounting posts are installed, I will secure the nuts on the backplate with a driver until they are snug. Some coolers may supply their own tools to complete these tasks. Reference the enclosed documentation of your cooler for details. Application of thermal paste is necessary to help uniform seating of the CPU cooler to the processor itself, and to allow optimal heat conductivity to the cooler. Only a small amount is needed as it will spread as the cooler is mounted. With the mounting hardware correctly aligned, uniformly tighten all mounts until secure. I will then attach the fan and the 4-pin fan connector to the CPU fan motherboard header. Installation of the system memory, or RAM, is fairly straightforward. Align the notch of the memory DIMM with the key of the motherboard DIMM socket. Insert straight down and apply pressure. The end clip should snap shut when the RAM stick is seated correctly. When installing 2 sticks of RAM, for example, install them into the same color DIMM slots to take advantage of the motherboard's memory channel architecture. In this case, I am installing 4 memory DIMMs to occupy all the slots. Your case should come with some brass standoffs that may need to be installed into the correct motherboard tray holes based on the form factor of your motherboard. Since I am installing an ATX motherboard, I will ensure that I have the standoff set up to mount it. The motherboard rear shield will snap into the rectangular slot in the rear of the case. Orient it so that it aligns with your motherboard ports. I will now install the power supply, and since it will be easier to do now later than in the build. Secure with screws. With the standoffs in place, carefully lower the motherboard into the case and align the rear ports with the rear shield. This should also align the mounting holes of the motherboard over the standoffs. Secure with screws in all locations. Locate the ATX motherboard 24-pin connector and orient the clip on the cable's plastic connector with the tab on the motherboard socket and insert until secure. Locate your CPU's auxiliary power connector. This is either a 4-pin or an 8-pin connector that is two 4-pins connected together. Note that this is different than the PCI Express graphics card auxiliary power plug, which is sometimes a 6+2 layout. The shape of the individual plugs for the sockets are keyed differently for each. Connect the auxiliary power. The solid-state drive that I'm using has been mounted onto a 3.5-inch adapter to allow installation into a normal drive bay. Mount the drives and secure them on both sides either with screws supplied with your case or using the toolless mount system if your case has one. Since these are serial ATA interface drives, find the SATA power cables with the L-shaped connector compared to the 4-pin Molex connector. Use the L-shaped SATA connector and attach the SATA power to the drives. SATA data cables also have a similar L-shaped connector. Snap one into the drive and the other into your motherboard's SATA header. Slide the optical drive into an empty bay in the front of your case. Secure and connect with power and SATA cables. Case fans can be connected to the motherboard's chassis fan headers. Connect the assorted front panel switch and LED cables to the motherboard's system panel. Refer to your motherboard manual for the exact pin layout for each cable to the board. Connect the remaining case panel accessories, such as audio and USB headers, to the motherboard, again referring to the manual for placement. You may have different options for your case and motherboard than shown here. Orient your graphics card into an empty PCI Express slot. Insert into place and secure. Connect auxiliary power to the card if it's required. With the machine connected to a monitor, mouse, and keyboard, power the system on. You should hear a series of beeps and then be greeted with a splash screen with your motherboard model and manufacturer. By entering the system BIOS, you can make adjustments to your boot sequence and view other important information about the system. At this point, you're ready to install your choice of operating systems, either by disk, USB, or network. Congratulations on your first PC build.